Good afternoon, everybody. I just have 15 minutes, so I'm going to touch on about 9 or 10 slides. I want to introduce some ideas to you that make the marine environment maybe different from what you've discussed already. Then I want to, of course, tell you about what sort of health we have for the marine environment in Ireland in terms of biodiversity. Maybe touch on some of the policy tools, some of the ways we work, and update you on the work we're doing on this new law to create a network of marine protected areas. And then I want to maybe set out some of the future challenges that I see, but I think these are things that will be shared by my peers in other countries. So the first thing is scale, okay? So it's the blue planet. So that's the Pacific. There's no land. So, and the second image you see there is what's called the spillhouse projection. So that's looking at the Earth from the Antarctic. There's only one ocean. So it's 71% of the planet. It's 97% of all the water. 90% of all our trade is done on it. 90% of the excess heat we've produced through excess greenhouse gas emissions has been absorbed by the oceans. And it produces about 50% of the oxygen we breathe. So it's very big. So that's the first thing to take away. So if you take very little else away, it's a big thing. Okay. Now, we cooperate in Ireland at a regional level. So regional is 13.5 million square kilometres. Okay. So the Irish piece of the map you see there is about 480,000 square kilometres. It's about 7 times the size of our land mass. So you can see in this image here, you can see the pizza slice is our regional arrangement. So that's 16 parties, that's 15 countries from Finland to Portugal and the European Union. That's called the OSPAR Commission, okay? The countries then that you see with the light blue outlines around them, that's their exclusive economic zones. We cooperate through the European Union with those. And those countries with green, or those land masses with green, those are non-European Union countries. So you can see that we cooperate with a lot of our neighbours in different ways. Now, the reason we cooperate is because it's a three-dimensional interconnected environment. So rivers are channelized, lakes are fixed, but the ocean, there's one ocean and it's interconnected. So the ecosystem is interconnected. There are different types of ecosystems within it, but essentially there's one open system. And our approach to working on it reflects that openness. You can see in there the United Nations has a number of structures underneath it. There's a law called the United Nations Convention for the Law of the Sea from 1982. The OSPAR Commission is the Northeast Atlantic Arrangement for the Protection of the Environment that looks after human pressures and protection of biodiversity. That's from 1992, but many of these grow from 1972. So the International Maritime Organization, the London Convention, the Convention on Biological Diversity is from the early 90s. And that area outside the red line that stretches out into the Atlantic, that's the high seas. Out beyond there, there's no legal protection for biodiversity. We're working on that in New York with other countries. We hope in the start of next year or sometime next year to finally secure a treaty to protect high seas biodiversity. But at the moment, there's nothing out there. Okay, so there's another thing I want to talk to you about, which is our approach. And I caught the tail end of some of the interventions just before lunch. So when we look at the health of the marine environment, we adopt what's called an ecosystem-based approach. Okay, and you can see it there described for you. And I'll show you the next slide, which maybe brings it into a little bit more kind of concrete detail. But essentially, you're including the humans in your consideration of the health of the environment, because it's humans are causing the problems that we have with biodiversity in the oceans. And ultimately, our social system and the ecological system, we are putting too much pressure on the ecological system. That's causing the problems we have with biodiversity in the oceans. So this is just an example. One of the drivers we have is our need food. Oh, sorry, I'm just getting a message up here that I'm signed out of something. I'll just close that. You can't see it there. You can see here, human drive is a need for food. Maybe another one is energy, a need for recreation, travel, transportation. These are societal drivers. They come and go. They're of different size and scale, but they're pretty much part of what makes human society tick. And they lead to those activities. So agriculture, fisheries, tourism. And those activities then exert a pressure. And the pressure then has an effect on the state of the environment. It puts pressure on the environment and it causes a change in the state of the environment, which has an impact on human society. Okay, so we're suffering biodiversity loss. Excess emissions has caused warming of the atmosphere. It leads to climate change, increasing temperatures. Okay, and our job then as regulators is to look at that last one, the measures. So we do measure all these other things, but measures is how we take action to address all of those. And there are different types of actions we can take. So we can regulate a sector, or we can create pollution limits. Okay, but again, I go back to my explanation. It's a transboundary open network, the ocean. So these rules have to be agreed and implemented across a number of countries, not only locally. Okay. So now I just want to touch on the health of the marine environment in Ireland and then in the Northeast Atlantic. One of the ways we assess it is we use this ecosystem-based approach, and we, along with all the other European Union member states, implement a directive called the Marine Strategy Framework Directive. I think you've probably heard about the Water Framework Directive. It's something similar to that. So we measure the state of the environment. You see some of those up there, like Descriptor 1 and Descriptor 3. We do invasive species, Descriptor 4 and 6. So these are the condition of them. And we also measure the pressures on them. And we measure them underneath each one of these. So something you might be very familiar with is marine litter. We would measure litter on the beach, litter on the seafloor, litter in the water, litter in animals, entanglement and ingestion. So you have a number of ways of measuring it. And there's a number of scientific standards around each of these, and they all add up into an overall assessment of the health of the marine environment. And we do that at a national level, then we try and aggregate those to an international level. Okay? We do this about once every 6 years. The next slide I'll show you is the result from 2020. We actually hope to do another assessment in 2024. Okay, so when everything is green, we call it good environmental status. It means we're using the ocean sustainably. Okay, so this pizza slice, if you take nothing else from it, what you see is that the orange slices of the pizza are the biodiversity and the biological ones. And orange isn't good. Orange is a blend. There's some red inside there. So red is bad. Red is not achieving it. We are achieving it for some things. So some fish are in a sustainable state. Some commercial fish, some aren't. There are some things we can't measure. We just don't have the scientific standards for them. But the takeaway from that slide, if you just pan back, is we're not causing a lot of pollution pressure in the Irish marine environment. We certainly have coastal problems, which are addressed under the Water Framework Directive. But in the size of our marine region, there's not a substantial pollution problem. If we lived in the Baltic or we lived in the southern North Sea, we probably would have a much higher pollution problem, a eutrophication problem, because of the huge nutrient inputs from the large European rivers and the confined state of those seas. But we're in the Atlantic, and we don't have a significant pollution problem, and where we have it, we have measures to address it. But biodiversity is not in good condition. And there are many, many reasons for this. They're mainly historic. At a North Atlantic level, a Northeast Atlantic level, across that 13.5 million square kilometres, we've been working for the last 4 or 5 years with the other countries in that area. So they're all the coastal countries, and then there are 3 landlocked countries for the Atlantic: Finland, Luxembourg, and Switzerland, who are part of that arrangement because of the river networks that flow into the Atlantic. And we've been carrying out this assessment, which will be published next year. Much of it is online at the moment, and there's a web link at the bottom of the page there. It's an OSPAR web link. And if you look at the individual assessments, they will aggregate into these thematic assessments, so human activities, pollution, biodiversity. And each one of those will form part of an overall, it'll be the largest assessment of the health of the Atlantic. But already the results are showing us from the biodiversity components, for example, that there are still many components of the ecosystem that are not in good condition. And they're not in good condition for many historic reasons. So even though we're on the right track and we're taking action to reduce pollution and to manage human activity, the ecosystem is very slow to respond. Some of the animals you see there, some of those large mammals that you'd be familiar with, like blue whales and humpback whales, they have life cycles longer than humans. You've got some seafloor habitats that they last, or it takes tens of thousands of years for them to establish. So if we cause harm in the marine environment, it takes a long time for recovery to take place. So that time scale issue is something really important in designing solutions. When you set a course for repair, it's got to be long-term and consistent. So this is just some policy approaches. And this is, again, how do we solve those problems? So I've just given you maybe a snapshot of the health of the environment. So how do we solve them? So we adopt long-term policy. We adopt long-term strategies, okay? Those strategies run from somewhere between 6 years, 10 years, 30 years, okay? So the Marine Strategy Framework Directive is a 6-year strategy cycle. The OSPAR Convention has a 10-year cycle. And then you have some countries like the United Kingdom, for example, who have a 30-year policy agenda to the 2050s. But you can see that you have to set your course and look for an outcome, so describing a future situation that you can all agree is what sustainable looks like, okay? You really do need a strong understanding of the science that you need to make decisions. Now, I think Kieran will talk about marine science more than I will, but there's a relationship between decision-making and science, and I would also suggest there's an issue for social science as well to be considered, okay? Then you have cooperation networks, and I would go further and say you need participation networks, okay? Governance, soft law, and hard laws. Okay, so now I want to talk about marine protected areas. We're on the verge of publishing, or the intention is for us to bring to government a proposal for a new law on marine protected areas. And you can see from the graphic here, which is the outcome of a public consultation, that we have 99% support. So really, the reason we can do this is because the public want it, and that's really important. So they want protection of marine biodiversity, and that's all sectors in society. That's not just people living in cities. We went around the country, so that's really, really important. Okay, it's last slide. Just some future challenges, okay? So some of these are self-evident, but what is sustainability, and are we living within our planetary limits? This is a huge challenge still. We're the wealthy north on the planet. What do we do to fix this, okay? There's a misalignment of policies at the moment. We're incentivizing things like food security and energy, and we're not incentivizing nature. We have value systems in society. Climate change is causing shifting baselines. What we want to protect and restore is gone by the time we get there, because climate change is having a real effect on the oceans. Okay? These are wicked problems. Wicked is a term we use in policy to mean it's a sticky problem, it's a knot, it's hard to unpick. The people we're asking to fix it are causing it at the same time. Think about plastic in your life. We're asking you to stop plastic pollution, but it's essential to our lives. So those wicked problems are really tough. The easy problems are gone. We've solved all of those, okay? We have to pick solutions that are maybe not the best, not the solution we would want ourselves. Their non-binary outcomes are going to be most important. So compromise solutions. So there's a crisis in the oceans, there's a crisis in biodiversity, but I've talked about slow ecosystems. Do we go fast or do we go slow? My suggestion would be is we make constant progress and don't lose sight of the urgency. You have new drivers. We're all going to want a green transition. All those things will come from the ocean. Those precious metals that go into car batteries, that go into cell phones, where will they come from? Those new drivers for resources from the sea, how will they work with the cumulative effects of other activities? So those are sort of some policy challenges that we have to solve as a society and in the position I occupy. Thank you very much.